This place, or so they say, is home to a spirit of a poor, unfortunate woman who many years ago died of the Black Death. She was a nurse to the Lord's 4 babes, who all perished along with her mother. Being of low birth, the nurse stood less chance of passing into the kingdom of heaven as the others did. Her name has not survived the centuries, nor has her resting place. She was buried in a shallow grave, unmarked and unremarkable. But she still roams the corridors on certain nights. So they say. I regret I have not had the pleasure of seeing her. She searches ever so restlessly for the issue of her master. So was her charge in life, but not able to find them. For they have passed on. She can never rest. I shudder to think of such a fate. To be someone whose only purpose is to serve, I think horrifying enough. But to serve indefinitely after one's demise. I dread such a notion to my very core. My wife says she saw her, only once, when she was a girl. Her younger sister also, but she is one who should be doubted in all matters pertaining to the truth. Some of their elder family members and yet many more of the servants claim to have witnessed this ghostly apparition roam abroad in the dead of night. Naturally, the woman is seen most frequently in the servants' quarters, where she reposed after the long days of toil. Perhaps she no longer suffers the unrelenting freeze of the unfurnished hallways, bare floors and unadorned walls therein. The doors hewn from offcuts of the pitty oaks, barely low enough to break the bitter winter breeze. The night's gown tailored of the cheapest, thinnest materials. The warm afterglow of the kitchen ovens below dissipating rapidly into the vast, dark expanse of the night. Curled up under blankets of tattered old hides, she ended each and every day of a mean existence, aching and exhausted. A pitiable lament incarnate amongst the lowest of his creatures. She died as she must have lived, wretchedly and alone. This house, first built in the early 14th century, but since developed is said to be a host to the spirit of a man, killed here in 1604. He was the young husband of a lady who'd recently inherited after the passing of her father. Both he and his wife were found dead in their bed one cold November morning, apparently undisturbed. A doctor found evidence of poison and ruled that they had been murdered. The culprit was thought to be the lady's younger sister, who had a history of moral crimes and stood to gain her sister's wealth and estate, as the couple had not yet had any children. No evidence was found, however, and no one was ever punished for the heinous crime. The man is said to appear in the master's bedroom on the night of the 7th of November, the date the pair had died. He does not speak, nor make any movement or indication of anger or distress. He simply stares blankly ahead. It is unclear what exactly the purpose of his being there is. Perhaps he hopes to see his sister-in-law and enact some kind of revenge. Maybe he intends to tell someone who his killer was. Or possibly, and this thought strikes me as the worst of all, he is there by no choice of his own and has no control over the matter. Perhaps he spends the rest of the year in purgatory, or some of the realm unknown. I do not know. I must admit to sleeping in one of the guest rooms on the night of 7th of November each year, just in case. After all, I wouldn't want to disturb him. There's no way of knowing he won't approach the bed, or scream, or worse, become violent in some manner or other. It is safest this way. Except that, to my secret distaste, my wife has become something of an amateur spiritualist in recent years. Having seen a seance given by Daniel Home, a Scotsman of some repute. A common fraudster to my eye. But she was most convinced. This year, on the 7th of November, we are to light a ring of candles on the bedroom floor, and left alone for the night, await the apparition. I say, I shall wait no more than half an hour before retiring, as she says she will remain awake the entire night, or at least until she's seen him. To avoid unwanted conflict, I have thus far held my tongue. But I must confess, a part of me wishes to see the spirit myself, so that I may also believe. They say the house is haunted. How can it be, you may quite rightly ask, if you were aware that the building was almost entirely rebuilt by my father in 1885? Well, you'll note the operative word, rebuilt. The place is of medieval origin, and despite significant additions and reworking over the centuries, remained standing unperturbed until 1877, when it was gutted by fire. Its two sole inhabitants were a man and wife, who both perished that dreadful night. The place lay in ruins for some time, until my father, a retiring builder's merchant and avid social climber, decided to take the project on himself and live out the rest of his days in the lap of relative luxury. But what caused the fire, you may ask? That remains a mystery. One might fairly assume a simple accident. That is, until you learn that the servants had been sent away for the night. None thought much of it at the time, but after learning of the disaster, began to suspect some kind of foul play. Who knows? But it must be observed that whenever one leaves a candle burning in a room of the house, one always discovers it extinguished upon one's return. Not a dramatic haunting, admittedly, but curious nonetheless. It has served me well as a party trick over the years. Father found it most distressing, however. He considered it some cruel vengeance for his disturbing the ruins of the old house. On the contrary, I find it most considerate. Father became all the more unsettled here in his later years. He claims to have some figures lurking in the shadows at night, and to have heard voices whispering to him in his sleep. I can't say I've had any bother here myself, except of course the business with the candles, although I'd hasten to call it bother. Admittedly, the setting is not quite as beautiful as it once was. There's an estate of houses that sprung up in what used to be the meadow at the bottom of the garden. The town has become almost unrecognisable over the past half-century or so. More people, more traffic, more noise, factories, industries, and with it, pollution of the varieties air, light and noise. But one still sees the same old people and visits the same old shops, theatres and restaurants as ever, and plenty are in far worse situations than I. And this room especially is said to be haunted, many believe by the ghost of Mr. Edward Main, who was killed by a German bomb that fell on this side of the house in 1941. He was an elderly bachelor and apparently profoundly deaf, so likely he didn't hear the air raid sirens going off. At least he must have been asleep at the time, so probably died instantly. Poor man. The room was then the master bedroom, but when it was rebuilt in the late 60s, became a home studio for a while. That was until the supposed ghost started interfering with the tape machines. The room has since been used simply for storage and ghost hunts. And of course, you can come here on Halloween and other selected nights of the year to take part in one of those, but be warned, visitors do so at their own peril. On your way to the attic, do mind your head on the low ceiling. And take a special care on your way back down, as the top step can be a bit wobbly. I'm standing in what is generally believed to be one of the most haunted houses in Britain. A building has stood on this site since as far back as the 14th century. And there have been reports of supernatural activity here for almost as long. In fact, the most recent addition to the spooky assemblage is supposedly the tour guide who tragically died here after falling down the attic stairs one night back in 1998. In fact, bad luck seems to befall many who come here. During the war, a man was killed by a German bomb. In the late 1800s, a couple died in a house fire here. And let me tell you, as someone from a family with a history of heart disease, I'm feeling pretty nervous right now.